Victory tonight for one New Mexico family trying to make sure their daughter's murder resulted in meaningful action.
22-year-old graduate student Katie Sepik had been walking home in the early hours after attending a late Saturday night party. A routine decision she had made countless times before.
That's how many cold cases one New Mexico police department has reopened just this year. Officers say the success of Katie's law has a lot to do with it.
From the moment authorities realized she was missing, her disappearance was treated as a top priority, with investigators immediately sensing the urgency of the situation. That same morning, nearly 200 miles away, Katie's mother woke up with an overwhelming sense of unease. Nothing specific had happened yet. There was no phone call, no message, no official word. But she felt an unshakable dread she couldn't explain. Later, she would describe it simply as a mother's intuition, a deep internal alarm that something was terribly wrong. When the phone finally rang at 2:15 p.m., her life changed instantly. The question on the other end was short and devastating. "Have you talked to Katie today?" In that moment, fear became reality. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. In this video, we take a closer look at the deeply unsettling story of Katie Sepik, a young woman whose promising future came to an abrupt and heartbreaking end. Her case is one that continues to raise questions, not because of graphic details, but because of the quiet, confusing sequence of events that led to her disappearance. Katie's story is not about shock value. It is about lost potential, unanswered questions, and a night that changed everything. Catherine J. Sepik, known to everyone simply as Katie, was the eldest of 3 children and grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico. From an early age, she stood out in her family as someone with energy that seemed impossible to contain. She was ambitious, expressive, and rarely content with standing still. Friends and relatives alike often described her as someone who filled a room with her presence, whether through laughter, storytelling, or sheer enthusiasm. Academically, Katie was driven. After earning a business degree from New Mexico State University, she was preparing for the next chapter of her life. Graduate school was right around the corner, and she planned to pursue an MBA, a step she believed would open doors and give her the independence she had always worked toward. At the time, she was balancing several roles at once. She was a student, a waitress, an active sorority member, and a young woman trying to map out her future. Katie's father, Dave, often spoke about her personality with a mix of pride and amazement. He described her as intense in the best way, someone who lived life at full speed. From childhood onward, Katie was known for her boldness. She loved attention, but also knew how to make people laugh. She had a sharp wit, a sarcastic sense of humor, and a way of turning ordinary moments into memorable ones. Whether she was cheering at a sporting event or putting on impromptu performances for her family, Katie brought a kind of joyful chaos wherever she went. In 2003, Katie had been dating Joe Bischoff for about 8 months. Their relationship, like many at that stage of life, was complicated by uncertainty. Joe was preparing to move several hours away to work in his family's business, while Katie was focused on starting graduate school. Neither of them had a clear picture of what the future would look like together, and that uncertainty had begun to create tension between them. Still, with Labor Day weekend approaching, they decided to put their worries aside. The plan was simple: enjoy the holiday, spend time with friends, and have a break from stress before responsibilities took over again. Katie, Joe, Katie's housemate Tracy, and several other friends went out together, visiting bars, dancing, and socializing late into the night. As the evening wore on and local bars began to close, the group joined a neighborhood house party attended by dozens of people. The atmosphere was lively, and the gathering stretched into the early morning hours. Earlier in the night, security footage from one of the bars showed Katie and Joe holding hands, appearing relaxed and affectionate, giving no indication that anything was seriously wrong. However, the mood shifted at the house party. At some point, Katie saw Joe kissing another woman. What followed was a heated argument that several people witnessed. Emotions were high, and alcohol only added to the intensity of the moment. Around 3 a.m., Katie left the house party alone. She did not tell anyone where she was going, and she took nothing with her. Later, Joe and one of his friends took Katie's car and drove around the nearby area, supposedly looking for her. They believed she might have gone home and fallen asleep. When they passed by her house and noticed that her bedroom light was off, they assumed she was already inside. They returned to the party, where Joe eventually fell asleep in a chair. When morning came, Katie still had not returned. Her car was parked outside the house, exactly where she had left it. Inside the car and inside the home were all of her personal belongings, her keys, her phone, and her handbag. This detail immediately alarmed those closest to her. Katie had walked out into the night with nothing, despite living only a few blocks away. Tracy, knowing that Katie and Joe had been having problems, questioned him about what had happened. At first, Joe downplayed the situation and denied that anything serious had occurred. He did not mention the other woman. As hours passed and no one could locate Katie, Tracy became increasingly concerned. She called friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have seen Katie after she left the party, but no one had answers. Eventually, Joe admitted that they had argued, but insisted that it was nothing more than a drunken disagreement. He claimed he believed Katie was trying to make a point or cool off and would return on her own. That explanation did little to ease the growing fear among those who knew her best. Tracy returned home and immediately checked Katie's room. Nothing had been disturbed. Her bed had not been slept in. Tracy's mother, who was also staying at the house, confirmed that she had heard nothing unusual during the night. Calls were made to local hospitals in case Katie had been injured or sought help, but none had any record of her. The police station was contacted as well, on the chance that she had been detained for intoxication. Again, the answer was no. As the hours turned into a full day, concern turned into panic. Speculation filled the silence, but no theory explained why Katie would simply vanish without her belongings. With no concrete leads and no sign of her whereabouts, those closest to Katie realized there was only one step left to take. It was time to file a missing persons report. 22-year-old graduate student Katie Sepik had been walking home in the early hours after attending a late Saturday night party, a routine decision she had made countless times before. What should have been an uneventful walk through familiar street instead became the starting point of a case that would quickly escalate into a full-scale investigation. From the moment authorities realized she was missing, her disappearance was treated as a top priority, with investigators immediately sensing the urgency of the situation. That same morning, nearly 200 miles away, Katie's mother woke up with an overwhelming sense of unease. Nothing specific had happened yet. There was no phone call, no message, no official word. But she felt an unshakable dread she couldn't explain. Later, she would describe it simply as a mother's intuition, a deep internal alarm that something was terribly wrong. When the phone finally rang at 2:15 p.m., her life changed instantly. The question on the other end was short and devastating. "Have you talked to Katie today?" In that moment, fear became reality. As police began canvassing the area around Katie's off-campus student house, the first troubling signs emerged. Investigators walked toward the back of the property, where it appeared Katie may have arrived home, or at least been close to doing so. One of her sandals lay on the ground, separated from its pair, an unsettling discovery on its own. Nearby, a rear window screen was visibly damaged. The gravel beneath showed signs of disturbance, as though something heavy had been dragged across it. These details immediately raised concerns that something had gone very wrong before Katie could make it safely inside. Unbeknownst to investigators at the house, another discovery had already set events into motion earlier that day. Around 11 a.m., a couple walking through an old waste site east of Las Cruces, New Mexico, noticed something unusual in the vast desert landscape. As they moved closer, they realized they had come upon the body of a woman lying on the ground. Authorities were notified immediately, though at the time, her identity was unknown. Just a few hours later, when the missing person report for 22-year-old Katie was officially filed, the pieces fell into place. The timing, though tragic, was significant. The desert stretched for miles, and investigators later acknowledged that if the couple had not passed through that specific area at that precise moment, it could have taken far longer to locate her. The scale of the terrain meant there was a very real possibility she might not have been found at all. Meanwhile, Katie's roommate Tracy was contacted by police and asked to come in to help identify someone connected to the missing person investigation. Tracy agreed immediately, believing that Katie may have ended up in a hospital or police station without identification. She assumed she was being asked to help bring her friend home. She had no idea what awaited her. What Tracy encountered instead left her completely shaken. The realization of what had happened to Katie was overwhelming and far beyond anything she had prepared herself for. Investigators determined that the location where Katie was found was likely not the place where her life had ended. There were no signs of a struggle in that area, suggesting she had been harmed elsewhere, possibly close to her home. Personal items she had been wearing, her watch and 2 rings, were missing, further deepening the mystery surrounding her final moments. Katie's parents later shared a detail about their daughter that deeply disturbed both investigators and the public. Katie had always had an unusually husky voice. Even as a child, she struggled to shout or scream. When she tried, almost no sound came out, only a faint, breathy attempt. The idea that she may have tried to call for help but physically could not was haunting to those who learned about it, adding another heartbreaking layer to the case. DNA evidence was collected and submitted to CODIS, the National Criminal Database. Given the severity of the crime, investigators were hopeful that a prior offender might be identified. However, no matches were found. This unexpected result only intensified the pressure on law enforcement, who now had to rely heavily on interviews and circumstantial evidence. Detectives returned their focus to the house party and began speaking again with Katie's closest circle, including her boyfriend Joe and her roommate Tracy. Joe told investigators that he loved Katie deeply and envisioned marrying her one day, starting a family together. He acknowledged that their relationship had been under strain, particularly due to the distance that would soon separate them, but he emphasized their shared future plans. What he did not initially disclose was the argument they had that night. In the days following Katie's death, Joe purchased a ring set with Katie's birthstone. According to friends, the couple had looked at rings together in the past. While it wasn't formally labeled, the ring closely resembled what many would consider a promise ring, symbolizing long-term commitment and shared intentions. However, perceptions began to shift as more information came to light. Joe later admitted that he and Katie had argued that night and that he had kissed another woman at the party while intoxicated. It also became known that he was the only person among nearly 40 partygoers who declined to provide a DNA sample. This detail did not go unnoticed. Witnesses from the party also claimed that Joe had been in possession of Katie's phone, handbag, and keys the following morning. Despite this, records showed he made multiple calls to Katie's phone. The contradiction raised troubling questions. If he already had her belongings, why call her phone at all? Was it confusion or something more calculated? Within days of Katie's death, Joe returned to his family's home roughly 300 miles away. When investigators later asked him to come back for a follow-up interview, he declined. By that time, his parents had retained a lawyer on his behalf, and he was advised not to answer further questions. By this stage of the investigation, law enforcement's attention had narrowed almost entirely onto Joe. From the very beginning, his behavior had stood out to detectives as unusual and, at times, contradictory. In his earliest interactions with police, Joe appeared highly emotional. He cried openly, telling officers that he could not imagine living without Katie and that he had fully intended to marry her someday. He spoke about a future that now no longer existed, framing himself as devastated and overwhelmed by grief. Yet, outside of those initial emotional displays, his actions painted a different picture. To investigators and those observing from the outside, Joe seemed to be pulling away from the process rather than leaning into it. He became increasingly reluctant to answer even basic follow-up questions. Requests for clarification were met with vague responses and eventually, silence. This growing lack of cooperation raised concerns, particularly given how early and prominently he had been involved in the events surrounding Katie's final hours. That distance widened further once Joe's attorney formally expressed dissatisfaction with the way the investigation was being handled. After that point, communication slowed dramatically. Authorities were legally limited in what they could compel him to do. Without probable cause, they could not force Joe to return to Las Cruces, submit to additional questioning, or provide a DNA sample. The investigation stalled as a result, bound by legal safeguards that, while essential, added to the frustration of those seeking answers. Katie's funeral underscored the depth of the loss felt by the community. More than 1,000 people attended to honor her life, a turnout so large that speakers were installed outside the church to ensure that mourners who couldn't fit inside could still hear the service. Friends, classmates, professors, and neighbors gathered together, united in grief and disbelief. One absence, however, did not go unnoticed. Joe was the only person close to Katie who did not attend. Instead, he chose to remain hundreds of miles away, reportedly after learning that many people were angry about his sudden departure from town. His decision added another layer of confusion and pain for Katie's family, who struggled to understand why someone who claimed to love her so deeply would not be present to say goodbye. For investigators, the funeral was not only a moment of mourning, but also an opportunity. With so many vehicles parked near the church, detectives discreetly examined tires, hoping to find a match to the tracks discovered near the location where Katie had been found. Each vehicle was carefully considered. None matched. In another attempt to gather information, police even placed a discreet camera near Katie's grave, hoping that if Joe visited, he might say or do something revealing. Once again, nothing came of it. As weeks passed with no significant breakthroughs, authorities announced a $50,000 reward for information. That amount would later double in hopes of encouraging someone to come forward. Despite the mounting pressure and public speculation, the investigation took an unexpected turn when forensic results confirmed that Joe's DNA was present in Katie's bedroom. That evidence effectively cleared him of involvement in her death. After learning about the results, Joe eventually agreed to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. While this allowed police to officially rule him out, it came at a cost. Valuable time, weeks that could have been crucial, had already been lost. With Joe eliminated as a suspect, investigators were forced to reassess everything. Eventually, they believed they had uncovered a potential break that led them far beyond New Mexico, nearly 1,500 miles away. 11 days before Katie's death, two men had attacked a 25-year-old woman in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Although the geographic distance between the two crimes was vast, detectives were struck by the similarities in the circumstances. The parallels were strong enough to justify a deeper look. When composite sketches of the suspects were released publicly, an unexpected tip came in. A dairy farm manager recognized the faces almost immediately. He identified the men as two of his employees, 23-year-old Juan Nieto and 27-year-old Gregorio Morales. Following the attack, both men had abruptly left town. Gregorio later returned and resumed work, raising suspicions. In a calculated move to assist authorities, the farm manager invited Gregorio for a drink. Without his knowledge, the manager kept the bottle afterward and turned it over to police so they could obtain a DNA sample. Months later, that DNA matched evidence from the Green Bay survivors case. Gregorio was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison for kidnapping and first-degree reckless injury. Juan Nieto accepted a plea agreement and received a 70-year sentence. Despite the initial optimism, the lead ultimately led nowhere. Neither man's DNA matched the evidence from Katie's case. Detectives described the moment as devastating. After months of hope, they were once again left without answers. It felt as though they were back at the beginning, with more questions than ever. Time continued to pass. More than 2 years went by without resolution. Then, 9 weeks after Katie's death, another alarming incident occurred much closer to home. A man armed with a knife broke into the apartment of two New Mexico State University students in the middle of the night. police arrived quickly and arrested 23-year-old Gabriel Avila at the scene. In a decision that stunned investigators, a judge granted Gabriel bail, allowing him to be released so he could, as he stated, get his affairs in order. Instead, Gabriel fled to Mexico and remained there until 2005. When he later attempted to re-enter the United States, he was arrested and ultimately convicted of aggravated burglary with intent to commit aggravated assault. While incarcerated, Gabriel was required to submit a DNA sample as part of standard procedure. When that sample was processed, detectives were shocked. It matched the evidence from Katie's crime scene. Until that moment, authorities in Las Cruces had never known Gabriel's name. No one in Katie's family, friend group, or social circle had ever heard of him. The revelation marked a turning point, one that finally brought clarity after years of uncertainty and reshaped everything investigators thought they knew about what had happened to Katie. Sometime after Gabriel Avila's arrest, a significant piece of evidence surfaced in an unexpected way. A ring was discovered inside his truck by his ex-wife, who by that point had already filed for divorce following his burglary conviction. At the time she found it, she had no idea that the ring once belonged to Katie, or that it would become one of the most emotionally powerful connections between Gabriel and the crime. To her, it appeared to be just another misplaced item left behind in a vehicle she no longer associated with him. When police later questioned her, they focused on the truck Gabriel had been driving during the period surrounding Katie's disappearance. Although Gabriel had sold the vehicle, his ex-wife explained that she was still able to contact the new owners. This cooperation proved critical. Investigators were able to examine the truck's history in detail, including its tires. Even though the tires had been replaced, authorities managed to locate the original set. When compared with evidence collected from the crime scene, the tires matched. It was yet another confirmation that investigators were finally on the right path. Despite the growing mountain of evidence, the case never reached a full trial. Before proceedings could formally begin, Gabriel chose to confess. The day after Christmas, Gabriel Avila was formally accused of kidnapping and murder. The timing was especially painful for Katie's family. That day would have marked Katie's 26th birthday, a milestone that should have been filled with celebration rather than grief. The announcement brought renewed attention to the case and underscored the emotional toll the long investigation had taken on everyone involved. Susana Martinez, who was serving as district attorney at the time, made her position clear immediately. She stated publicly that there would be no bargaining for a plea deal and that she had no intention of dropping any charges. Gabriel and his legal team were fully aware of her stance. Martinez emphasized that the evidence was overwhelming and that the prosecution was prepared to see the case through without compromise. She was confident she could secure a conviction. In May 2007, Gabriel Avila entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. During the proceedings, he stated that he did not understand why he had committed the crime and expressed a desire to apologize directly to the Sepik family. For Katie's father, Dave, the words carried little weight. He acknowledged that Gabriel appeared remorseful, but said that no amount of regret could change what had been taken from their family. Katie's mother, Jan, and her sister, Gianne, processed the moment differently. Gianne later explained that she chose forgiveness not for Gabriel's sake, but for her own peace. She said she wanted him to find redemption, even if she could never forget what had happened. Their responses reflected the deeply personal and complex ways families cope with unimaginable loss. Gabriel was sentenced to 69 years in prison. Under the terms of the sentence, he would become eligible for parole after serving 30 years, placing his earliest possible release in 2043. Given the seriousness and violent nature of his crimes, however, officials have indicated that parole approval is highly unlikely. In the aftermath of the case, Katie's family searched for a way to transform their grief into something that could protect others. Rather than retreating from the public eye, they committed themselves to meaningful change. At the time Katie was found, New Mexico law, like the laws in most states, did not allow DNA to be collected at the time of arrest. Only individuals who were convicted and sent to prison were required to submit DNA for inclusion in criminal databases. That gap in the system haunted Katie's family. In 2006, New Mexico enacted what became known as Katie's Law. The law represented a major shift in criminal procedure. Under its provisions, anyone arrested for a violent crime would be required to submit a DNA sample. Had this law existed earlier, Gabriel Avila would have been required to provide DNA when he attacked Tracy and Leslie less than 3 months after Katie's death. While Jan acknowledged that the law would not have saved her daughter, she firmly believed it could have removed Gabriel from the streets far sooner. Katie's Law soon gained national attention. As of today, 31 states have enacted Katie's Law or adopted similar legislation. In 2011, the law was expanded even further to include all felony offenses, significantly increasing the number of DNA samples available for comparison and investigation. John also founded DNA Saves, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating lawmakers, law enforcement, and the public about the importance of early DNA collection. Through advocacy and outreach, the organization works to prevent future crimes and ensure that innocent people are not wrongly accused. Although Katie's family may never meet the individuals whose lives were impacted by these reforms, they say knowing those people exist gives their efforts meaning. After more than 2 decades of advocacy, they believe Katie's Law will help solve thousands of unresolved cases, protect future victims, and prevent wrongful convictions. That belief is already beginning to take shape. The Santa Fe Police Department has announced the reopening of hundreds of cold cases, 318 in total. Lieutenant Andrea Dobbins confirmed that the department has a freezer filled with preserved evidence waiting to be tested. In July, police sent thousands of samples including hair, blood, and clothing to the state crime lab. Additional DNA submissions followed in the months afterward. According to Dobbins, this renewed push is directly tied to the success and expanded reach of Katie's Law. What once seemed impossible is now achievable. Evidence that sat untouched for years is finally being re-examined, offering long overdue hope to families who have waited decades for answers. For Katie's family, that progress is the legacy she left behind, not defined by tragedy alone, but by lasting change. According to Andrew George Sepik, Katie's younger brother, his admiration for his older sister began as far back as he could remember. To him, Katie was never just a sibling. She naturally stepped into multiple roles throughout his life. At times, she was a second mother, offering guidance, reassurance, and protection. At other times, she was a best friend, someone who made everyday moments feel important simply by being present. Andrew recalls how Katie always encouraged him, especially during family gatherings where music, laughter, and playful performances were common. He remembers standing beside her, trying to contribute backup vocals during impromptu family sing-alongs, even when he wasn't quite sure he knew the words. Katie never dismissed his efforts or pushed him aside. Instead, she welcomed him into the moment, making space for him to feel included and valued. Sharing the spotlight came naturally to her, particularly when it meant lifting someone else up. What stands out most to Andrew, however, is Katie's instinctive sense of loyalty. She was deeply protective, especially when it came to her younger brother. Even in situations where she may not have wanted to get involved, she never allowed anyone to speak down to him or treat him unfairly. If Andrew was uncomfortable or hurt, Katie noticed immediately, and she acted. Her protection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was constant, steady, and unwavering. Andrew describes her as someone who always had his back, no matter the circumstances. Whether it was standing up for him, encouraging his confidence, or simply being present when he needed reassurance, Katie made sure he never felt alone. To him, that fierce protectiveness defined who she was, not just as a sister, but as a person whose strength came from caring deeply about the people she loved. Even now, those memories remain vivid. For Andrew, Katie's legacy lives on in the quiet moments she shared with him. The encouragement she offered without hesitation, and the sense of safety she created simply by being his sister.